In March 2020, a cargo ship left Shanghai, carrying 10,000 containers of electronics, furniture, and machinery. None of the crew knew it then, but this ship was sailing into a new era. A few weeks later, the world shut down. Factories went dark. Ports fell silent. Planes grounded. And the machine that powered globalization for 50 years stopped. Within months, governments printed $2 trillion to keep the economy alive, a desperate gamble to buy time to prevent collapse. But that money didn't just rescue the world, it rewired it. From America to China, from Vietnam to Mexico, the $2 trillion flood would change what we buy, where we make it, and who controls it. This is the story of how a pandemic, a printer, and a planet addicted to cheap production changed the world's supply chains forever. For decades, globalization ran like a perfect algorithm. Companies in the West designed. Factories in Asia produced. Cargo ships connected them all. By the 2010s, over 80% of global trade moved by sea. A single iPhone crossed 30 countries before reaching your pocket. The world was addicted to one idea: efficiency. Just-in-time manufacturing meant no warehouses, no backup stock, no slack. Everything arrived exactly when needed, saving billions, but leaving no margin for error. And the center of it all was China. By 2019, China produced 28% of the world's manufacturing output, more than the US, Germany, and Japan combined. Every laptop, sneaker, and car part traced back to a Chinese factory, a Chinese port, or a Chinese component. The system was beautiful until it broke. And when it did, the cost wasn't measured in goods, it was measured in trust. In early 2020, Wuhan, the world's factory hub, shut down. Ships couldn't dock, planes couldn't fly, workers couldn't leave their homes. Overnight, global production collapsed by 16%. Supermarkets emptied. Automakers halted. Tech giants warned of shortages. For the first time in living memory, nations realized they had outsourced survival itself. The US couldn't make masks. Europe couldn't make ventilators. Even medicine, antibiotics, painkillers were all made abroad. Governments panicked. And in Washington, the response came with the stroke of a keyboard. $2 trillion in stimulus. Money to keep citizens afloat, companies alive, and panic contained. But as trillions flowed into wallets, the world's ports stayed closed. Demand exploded, but supply didn't move. The result, the biggest inflationary wave in half a century. It was meant to save the economy. Instead, it reshaped it. Economists called it the supply chain shock. But it wasn't a shock. It was a revelation of how fragile the global system truly was. As lockdowns dragged on, CEOs and politicians came to the same conclusion. We can't rely on one country anymore. Within months, a new race began, the Great Supply Chain Relocation. Japan launched a $2.2 billion fund to move factories out of China. The US created incentives for friendshoring, shifting production to allies like Mexico, Vietnam, and India. Apple began assembling iPhones in India. Nike expanded to Vietnam. Tesla scouted Mexico. For decades, globalization had been about cost. Now it was about control. Supply chains became geopolitical weapons, and every nation started stockpiling influence. The Biden administration poured $52 billion into the CHIPS Act to bring semiconductor factories back home. The EU followed with its own $43 billion plan. The result? A massive reindustrialization push, the first in decades. But the shift came with a price. Efficiency died. A container that once cost $1,500 to ship from Shanghai to Los Angeles now cost $20,000. Cheap was gone. Safe was in. The global supply chain, once a single spiderweb centered on China, began to splinter into rival ecosystems. Beneath the headlines, a quiet divide was forming, not between rich and poor, but between West and East. The US and its allies built the freedom supply chain: chips from Taiwan, cars from Mexico, batteries from South Korea. China countered with its own dual circulation strategy, making everything it could at home while exporting dominance in green tech, EVs, and rare minerals. Beijing poured hundreds of billions into domestic semiconductor fabs, lithium mining, and infrastructure across Africa and Asia. In effect, globalization was no longer global. It was bipolar. Two worlds, two systems, two supply chains. One led by Washington, the other by Beijing. Between them, smaller nations became battlegrounds for investment. Vietnam received record foreign investment. Mexico overtook China as America's largest trading partner. India, once a bystander, became the new manufacturing hub of the democratic world. Even Africa joined the race. Ethiopia, Kenya, and Morocco began producing cars, textiles, and chips. Supply chains that once flowed through one giant now ran through many smaller ones. The age of dependency was over. The age of diversification had begun. But in every boardroom, one question still haunted executives. What happens when the next crisis hits? Because while money can build factories, it can't buy resilience. That must be earned through strategy, not stimulus. The $2 trillion gamble was never just economic. It was psychological. It taught governments that they could print their way out of collapse. It taught companies that survival mattered more than efficiency. And it taught nations that dependence is power if you control what others need. The US now subsidizes factories at home. China controls 80% of rare earth processing. Europe scrambles to balance between them. The global system, once designed for cooperation, is now optimized for containment. But while nations build walls, the market still flows through cracks. Investors move capital faster than tariffs can stop it. And in that chaos lies the next revolution: AI-driven, automated, and decentralized production. A world where factories don't need borders, only bandwidth. The real gamble wasn't printing $2 trillion. It was assuming control could be restored, when in truth, the world had already evolved beyond it. 50 years ago, globalization was the dream of efficiency. Today, it's a battlefield of control.
The $2 trillion stimulus was meant to save the system, but instead, it exposed its fragility. Factories moved, currencies inflated, nations rearmed economically. The global machine survived, but it no longer runs the same way. And the next time crisis hits, there will be no illusion of business as usual, because the age of infinite growth built on infinite trust is over. This is the legacy of the $2 trillion gamble. Not collapse, not victory, but transformation. The day the world discovered that money can't buy stability, only change.